Again, I just want to continue to point out the Dow is rising as we're seeing selling on NASDAQ and S&P. I warned you this could happen, kind of masking what is going on. The Dow was up 0.67%. It was up 260 points. It was up over 300 at the highs, moved into the golden pocket, so we'll be watching that. S&P was down 0.31%, down almost 17 points. NASDAQ was down just over 1%. Russell had a gain of 0.43%. Notice the Russell's going to rebound in the Dow while we're seeing distribution with NASDAQ and the S&P 500. The VIX, interestingly enough, had a bigger rally, didn't hold on to the highs of the session. It was still up 1%. It had risen to the 50-period moving average at the highs of the session, a bit higher, turned down, got a black candlestick. We've seen a series of black candlesticks. This one did mark a peak over here at the 200-period moving average. Again, in order for volatility to return on the S&P, you got to get back above the 50-period moving average. That's the green line that we just turned off of today, back above the 200, and then you got to be able to stay above that 50-period moving average. So again, watching to see if we attempt a recovery or not on the S&P 500 or get a bigger dump, get any kind of meaningful bounce. As I've said, I expect those negative divergences in the weekly time frame to play out, but it's still possible that we form a divergence on the RSI in the daily time frame. Last week's highs hold, don't form a divergence on the RSI. There's no requirement that we have to do that. We've seen other tops happen in 2022 and 2023. Seen no divergence at a top or a bottom. This be one of those times. So again, stalling at the 50-period moving average. If we see the VIX pull back, it buys the S&P a little bit more time. If we start getting above that 50-period moving average or get further consolidation, the S&P could sell off further. Testing the 10-period moving average right now, as you see in this video. Again, I told you it is very possible that the S&P 500 and NASDAQ are setting up head and shoulder patterns and that the Dow has already peaked if we have a double top pattern. I've talked about this. Told you down over here that I thought we would try to get a counter trend into the golden pocket, which again is between the 61.8 Fibonacci and the 78.6 Fibonacci. That's exactly where we're at right now. Bollinger Bands have tightened on the Dow. Again, a big move has come. Now, maybe that's up, but it's also maybe that, like it did happen over here, that we went up, but then went in the other direction. You're watching the 78.6 Fibonacci. We were just shy of it there at the 39,000 low 600 area. Did see a little tiny topping tail develop there, but again, we've come up into the level that where I thought we would go, as I've talked about. I talked about an ABC type of a move. If the Dow stops making new highs, it hit major resistance. I talked about hitting a 125-year trend line to 1899. I've talked about that length in detail. If we have a peak here, it's possible we're forming a bear flag here on the Dow. We got perfected sell signals on both NASDAQ and S&P last week. Last week we saw the 9 count. The NASDAQ peaked that very day. Again, oftentimes you'll peak that day or you go a little bit higher. Good chance if we peak that day with our topping tail in the weekly time frame holds with our gravestone doji. If we attempt a recovery, we still may get a lower high. It may be the S&P attempts to go higher, but NASDAQ does not. They diverge again, but it is possible they both have peaked, start triggering major sell signals. Momentum does in fact shift this week. Possible head and shoulders, but a 9-9 reversal pattern here for NASDAQ. S&P's got the same pattern. On the daily chart, it's either got a topping tail here where we're going to, again, getting a bigger sell up below the 10 period and start seeing momentum shift, or you've got an inverted hammer here where you're going to try to rebound back up. Again, we'll see how it unfolds if we can bounce off the 10 period. Here, we had a 9 count right here. It was never perfected. We perfected it last Monday, and again, went a little bit higher. NASDAQ peaked on Monday, S&P peaked on Thursday, went a little bit higher, and they diverged from one another. We closed below the upper Bollinger Band on both of them. Talked about, and again, that could be it with that close back below the upper band, or you might come back up again. Here we closed below it, but then we came back up. We were slightly higher, but we didn't get back above the upper band. Could see something like that happen here. We'll be watching, but again, 9 count perfected signals. Now we're getting a 1 of a 9 to the downside. We're either going sideways or we're now starting a new 9 count to the downside or attempting to start a 9 count. Don't always finish. So is this topping tail? Does this mean sellers were right here with a lower high, or does it mean inverted hammer where we try to form that divergence on the RSI still in the daily time frame? By the way, going back to NASDAQ, it also got a new 1 of a 9 to the downside, which is telling us either we're going sideways or we're now starting to move down. You got a price flip, which means that this bar, being a 1 of the 9 to the downside, it closed below the bar from 4 bars ago, and we had that happen with both NASDAQ and S&P. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the chart, if you like the indicators, please let me know that by supporting the channel today. I don't have any sponsors. I don't want any sponsors. I don't want to sell stuff to you or send you to websites that want to sell you stuff. I just ask that you help out, do what you can, and support the channel. If you need your help, just follow the link below. You can donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. If you do that, I thank you. Take a moment to do that. I would really, really appreciate it. I thank you for your consideration for that. Just real quick. Again, momentum here is forming a divergence very similar to what we have in the weekly time frame. Again, you've got this divergence going on. It hesitated to go above into positive territory, and when it did, it's now making a lower high and again diverging with the S&P 500. So again, suggesting a reversal. This is the S&P 500 daily chart. Now last week, I told you we started the week off with a red awesome oscillator bar here in the weekly time frame on the S&P 500, but it went away by the end of the week. Remember, we had a rally on Monday last week with our short trading week. S&P sold off and went slightly higher. On Thursday, sold off, continued to sell off on Friday. Today it was also down. It turned up on an intra-week basis, and it got that divergence. NASDAQ turned up, and it got a lower high. Last Monday's high was the peak on NASDAQ, and we've been seeing this big sell-off with Nvidia, and that has been weighing on the NASDAQ. I've been talking about, and I'll show you the weekly chart divergence that is triggering all this selling pressure on Nvidia. But again, we start the week off with a red bar. We'll see if we close the week with a red bar, but you've got the divergence going on the awesome oscillator, on the MACD, here on the stochastic, and again, the RSI in the weekly time frame. Watching to see if we start to sell off. Again, do we end up dropping below the 10-week, the red line, and then the 20-week? And if we do, we get a reversal of conditions in the weekly time frame that would allow the divergences to play out. So we'll see what happens with this red bar. Does it end the week that way? NASDAQ still doesn't have it. We're seeing the stochastic roll over here, though, but you get the same divergences going on. MACD, or here's the awesome oscillator, MACD down here. And again, we had that topping tail. In the weekly time frame on NASDAQ, we got a gravestone doji. We took out the 10-period moving average today in the daily time frame on the NASDAQ. We don't have a reversal of conditions here yet, but again, our second red bar, still possible we get a confirmation of a lower high, divergence on those RSIs in the daily time frame. MACD has not yet rolled over, so we'll be watching to see what happens here surrounding our 10-day moving average. 100 was down 1.15%, down 226 points rounding up. This is our third red awesome oscillator bar for the S&P 500 in the daily time frame. Again, you still might form a divergence coming down to just above the 10-period moving average. Again, S&P was down. And do you notice S&P and Dow, the S&P and NASDAQ are down, but what's up? The Dow. Remember I told you that that was likely going to happen. That's happening. Now, if we see the S&P attempt a recovery and to form a divergence on the RSI in the daily time frame, don't guarantee that happens, but if it does, watch to see if NASDAQ gets a lower high. We already have a divergence between them. Last week, it may become bigger. S&P attempts to recover, but if we can't, and we see price hold from last week, we'll need to see a bearish reversal of conditions and all kinds of momentum signals turning bearish. Again, MACD has not rolled over here yet. Stochastic has, but it's still above 80. We'll be watching if we start getting a bearish reversal of conditions. We are above the 10 period here. NASDAQ took it out today. Much to see. Do we rebound surrounding these 10-period moving averages or get a decisive break below them and hold below them. Does NASDAQ hold below its 10-period? Does the S&P drop below it? Some things to pay attention to. If signals all start going bearish, it means we're either going sideways or down. We start seeing momentum signals shift and we start seeing them turn bearish. It means we're either going to go form a divergence and go sideways or that we're just going to go down. Maybe rebound and get a lower high at some point. Right now here, momentum is still bullish for the S&P 500. The trend is still bullish at this time. Now here's the S&P 500 daily chart. And again, here I have the bars reflecting momentum. They're still green. Okay, the momentum line is still blue. If momentum is about to shift, these are the first that will shift. If momentum shifts tomorrow or later this week, then we've got to see the trend signals taken out. If we see these signals all begin to turn bearish, it tells us we're either going sideways or we're going down. The signal is still bullish, momentum is still bullish, and the trend is still bullish. And again, momentum is starting to wane. So again, we could end up getting a bigger sell-off by the end of the week or even a recovery and a bigger sell-off. Very possible that the topping tail on NASDAQ has marked a peak with the gravestone doji. Now, so far, I haven't seen any sell signals show up here. They still may. Watching for the shift in momentum. This high, I saw momentum and sell signals begin to show up over here at this bottom. I saw bottoming signals and momentum. And again, in both cases, it led to a shift with the trend signal. And here, we don't have that yet, at least not yet, so we'll be watching. So pay attention to the MACD. Does it start rolling over, or is it prevented from rolling over and we get some type of rebound? NASDAQ's testing the 10-period, S&P is just above it in the daily time frame. Well, the NASDAQ took out the 10-period, S&P is still above it. Again, the candlestick here, is it a topping tail where we're going to now continue and go lower, getting a lower high? Last Thursday's peak, and we're going to get a bigger sell-off. Still attempt a recovery. Again, it very well could be that we saw the peak last week, as I've talked about at great length and detail, but you still got a shot at divergences on the RSI in the daily time frame. See if we start losing the 10-period here. We did on NASDAQ, but momentum has not shifted yet on NASDAQ. It could by tomorrow. Don't get a recovery. Talked about the divergences here last Friday with momentum, and that's been playing out, giving us a sell-off. Does it lead to a bigger reversal? And we have these possible head and shoulder patterns here in the daily time frame. If we start heading down, attempt to rebound, S&P can still try to go higher, get a topping tail, and still sell hot before the end of the week. Could still be NASDAQ and S&P diverge from one another, get a larger divergence. Let me be clear, they already did. S&P moved to a higher high on Thursday. NASDAQ got a lower high, peaking last Monday, at least so far. If those signals begin to get confirmed with momentum shifting and the trend signals changing. Besides this channel that I've been talking about, these different channels, we also have a possible rising wedge on the S&P 500 where, again, if we just exclude these shadows, but again, going to be watching the RSI and the MACD. Again, the MACD is not rolled over yet on NASDAQ and S&P, so if histogram starts ticking back up, it may be that we get that divergence on the RSI, we get a divergence on the histogram, something like this, or maybe it rolls over and then it turns back up afterward and we see a move towards 50, the 50 level on the RSI before it turns back up on the S&P 500. That looks something like that. So again, we'll be watching. And again, have the divergences in the weekly time frame. We have the divergences in the monthly time frame. There's no requirement we form a divergence here. Often we don't. Major top in August of 2022, we didn't, and other turning points. Slow down over here. There was no bullish divergence there, but it still marked a bottom. Dream reading. Again, here we have prices coming off the high, possible rising wedge here. Exclude the shadows. We'll be watching the RSI. If we go down further, we have this trend line excluding the shadows. 60-minute time frame. I told you to be watching the 50-period moving average in this horizontal support. We took out the 50. And we came back and we took out ever so slightly this horizontal support. And if we exclude the shadow, we're just right there, slightly above it. So again, we now have another successful back test or attempted back test of this broken trend line. I talked about it. Again, Did we get an immediate back test, and now we're trying to get another back test to it, but just getting a throwback? You got a possible bull flag here in the 60-minute time frame. No guarantee that plays out, but it is possible if we get back above our 50-period moving average. Again, do we form a divergence here with the RSI? Had this equal peak here in a Class B divergence where price went higher. NASDAQ did not. Okay, NASDAQ made a lower high, but they did diverge, so that could mark a turning point for the market. And you did get a divergence in that you had these two equal peaks and price went higher. NASDAQ did not form a divergence, doesn't have to. But here on these 60-minute charts, you still might get it. If the bull flag gives us a bounce surrounding our 50-period moving average, we're at the cloud here in this horizontal support level. If we attempt to rebound, you still might get it. And you still might get a larger divergence between NASDAQ and S&P if NASDAQ's topping tail from last week holds. Some things to pay attention to. If we bust right through this level and keep going, which we may, then again, be watching the 10-period moving average directly below in the daily time frame and the lower end of the cloud here on the 60-minute chart. The P could be confirming a lower high here. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. MACD is right at the center line here. You start moving negative, you're going to get a bigger dump. You firm up here, rebound, and then we'll be watching to see if a divergence attempts to develop on S&P here in the 60-minute time frame. But again, a reversal, listen carefully, a reversal very well could have started from last week's highs. Did you hear what I just said? No requirement that we get a divergence in the daily or 60-minute time frame. You already have it in the monthly and the weekly. It's possible, but there's no requirement. If we have a breakdown and a backtest, maybe that's it. Start seeing signals all begin to turn to bearish. With the rebound on the 60-minute chart to try to backtest for the second time, we had that immediate backtest of the trend line. Again, we came back up and we saw turn back up. Now it's trying to roll over. We'll see if we try to get some traction here, go deeper, and then try to get some traction if a divergence develops there. We want to be watching how we close the week out. That topping tail that we got on NASDAQ, a weekly chart last week, we'll see what happens. That's it. If the highs hold from last week, then you have a breakdown and back test here. We could get a much bigger sell-off back towards the 200, back towards this trend line here in the 60-minute time frame. I've talked about different trend lines, potential channels if we do attempt to rally. No guarantee we do, but the red trend line here connects this low and this low, this high, and again, we haven't reached it. So again, it's speculation at best. And then we have the blue trend line from this low to this low on the S&P 60-minute chart, whereas I've drawn a parallel boundary from that with this peak here and this peak here. And again, you have a nice channel completed there that's possibly marking a peak with last Thursday's high. And if we go higher, we could reach that trend line again, or maybe the red trend line from the other channel here that I've drawn. So just some trend lines that, again, one we've reached. We may not reach this blue one again. We may not reach the red one. If we start selling off and getting a bigger dump, I'll be watching the 200 and some of these trend lines that I've drawn in down here. To that trend line, excluding the shadows in the daily time frame. If we do start selling off, do we take out the 10 and 20 period moving average on the daily chart with the S&P? NASDAQ's already taken out the 10 momentum. We still don't have a bearish reversal of conditions yet for NASDAQ. A possible inverse head and shoulders pattern. We tried to break out of it during the session. Back above the 200, 50 even got back above the 200, but then it quickly failed, forming a possible bear flag pattern that I've outlined here with the dotted black line, and again formed a divergence here, tried to get back above it. It failed under the 50 period and the 200 period as they got the death cross, and we pushed on lower. So again, that pattern failed. We formed this smaller bear flag. Now it could be forming a larger bull flag pattern here in the intraday time frames, as I showed you on the 60-minute chart right here. Possible bull flag, or if we include the shadows, maybe we go a little bit lower, but you got a possible bull flag here. I've excluded the shadows, and we're just above that level. Again, no guarantee that pattern plays out. Again, you start blowing through this level of support, you get a much bigger sell-off. So again, it is possible the top is in from last week. We'll be watching attempt an immediate recovery or not. You see the bull flag and the bear flag together close up on the 15-minute chart. The potential bear flag breaking down now. The potential bull flag if we come to bottom here, or again, including the shadows a little bit lower there. But start seeing signals all go bearish. Well, then maybe that's it. Maybe the top is in. I've said Nvidia dropped, and again, NASDAQ's following Nvidia, and Nvidia dropped 6.68% today, down just under $8.50, again, with the split going on here. We've seen this reversal bar right here, and we got that candle of indecision, exactly what NASDAQ did, and now we get another big drop, 6.68%. You still have the possibility of a divergence on the RSI. If we try to recover, that could happen. Have a major negative divergence in the weekly time frame. Again, maybe it turns into triple negative divergence. NASDAQ and Nvidia can try to move to a new high, but it is possible that the peak is in. You don't have to form a divergence here, and it is possible that, again, that a reversal is starting here without a divergence present, because we do have one in the weekly time frame for Nvidia. MACD, same thing. You could get a divergence here. MACD's rolled over here. We get the sell-off. Are we going to get a rebound back up and get a divergence, or is that all she wrote? Taking the time to show this to you because, again, NASDAQ has been following Nvidia. If Nvidia sinks and reverses and the bubble pops, NASDAQ will reverse hard. Now, again, look at right here. We have this divergence going on. This looks very similar to the divergences that are developing in the weekly time frame, NASDAQ and S&P, but we got the topping tail. NASDAQ got a topping tail. It got a gravestone doji. We had a red bar here. It was down 4% last week. Now it's down 6.68%, gapping lower. So again, we'll be watching as what becomes of this. Again, if we rebound back up, you could still end up getting a lower high or a divergence if you end up coming back up, or go lower and come back up. However it plays out, again, it still might be that we get a divergence in this most recent price action, forming this larger divergence here, having it evolve from a simple divergence to a triple divergence, certainly possible. But again, requirement, it could be that these topping tails we had on NASDAQ and Nvidia are the top with this simple divergence. So do keep that in mind. We are seeing the same thing with the stochastic down here. It rolled over, it formed a divergence, and again, it's turning down still. So this is weighing on the NASDAQ, and again, S&P and NASDAQ have been dropping the last several days. Dow has been rising back up. I told you that was going to happen. Possible divergences on the RSIs in the daily time frame, and we get a rally in S&P, or maybe a divergence between S&P and NASDAQ in the daily time frame. Are starting to see selling pressure and distribution taking place here on Nvidia and NASDAQ. Just wanted to show you that. And again, as I said, possible that the top is in on NASDAQ. Ended up seeing a sell-off late last week. Remember when I talked about a post-Fed sell-off, and I said, again, but right after the Fed or the following week, we could rally up and end up having a sell-off by the end of the week, which is what happened with NASDAQ on Thursday and Friday, giving us the gravestone doji here in the weekly time frame. Remember, we talked about this at great length and detail. Very possible NASDAQ has peaked with that topping tail. When you get a topping tail, you have to assume that's a top until proven otherwise. Until we push back above that level, it very well could be a peak with NASDAQ. NASDAQ's got a really nice looking negative divergence here in the weekly time frame. Again, you got the topping tail just like on Nvidia. They both had these negative divergences. It was a negative divergence over here that marked the turn. Over here, bullish divergence down here. This negative divergence gave us the 8% sell-off. And now we have this multiple point divergence that very well could be now complete. Again, we have the rising wedge. Here, I've excluded the shadows, and if you just connect this level, excluding the shadows, this peak, we slammed right into it, and we are reversing. This is the log scaling. Bring it up close. You can see, again, the gravestone doji. Again, we're going to be watching. Do we confirm that pattern by the end of the week? And again, that could be a top for the NASDAQ if we get confirmation this week and then start seeing signals all begin to turn bearish. These divergences are going to play out. Because they take their time doing so, we did expect upper channel lines to be tested. Rising wedge here, and we got an overthrow on S&P and an overthrow on NASDAQ. And again, you've got a possible, if we get a big ugly red bar this week, you've got a possible evening star evening doji star, and this gravestone doji could be the second bar of the 3-week pattern. You're watching to see if we close sharply for the week on the NASDAQ. Versions on the awesome oscillator. Here it is on the RSI, and again, you've got it on the MACD. It's all over the place on indicators. Now, this is the log scaling with our rising wedge scenario. Here's the linear scaling. And again, we were down 1.15% to start the week off here. Again, this is the linear. We have this trend line right here. We slightly overthrew it and closed right back below it. So that's still a possibility for the channel, where I've included this shadow to this shadow. And again, you still have a nice looking channel here in the linear scaling here, or with the linear scaling, I should say. The sell-off could happen immediately here, or we could dance around this area for a little while. Look at over here. Again, we had the divergence form right here. Then we sold off, we rebounded, we ended up getting a lower high, but we kind of danced around this area. You know, same thing over here. We had this low, and then we came back and tested it and kind of consolidated in both of those cases. Could see something like that here. Before we had the sell-off here, we consolidated for 7 straight weeks before we began to sell off there. Part of that 7-week period was part of the sell-off. It's just we were in a trading range, so people didn't realize it was taking place. So again, we'll be watching what happens here with this divergence. And by the time the MACD rolls over, we will have likely peaked and begun a sell-off, and that very well could be right here, right now. S&P starting the week off down 0.31%, 16.75 points, so just under 17 points. Again, we had the trend line drawn from this peak to this peak, to the shadow here, and again, you still have a nice looking parallel boundary. If this high holds, again, we'll be looking for a reversal, taking out of the 20-week moving average. We bounced off of it back at that time. Again, that very well could be a bottom that we rally back up and get a lower high like over here, or a higher high like over here, and forming a divergence. It ended up we went higher and we're forming the divergence. Still have a really nice looking channel here, but again, these divergences are going to play out. And again, people go, well, they didn't play out, so they're not going to play out, and people lull themselves into a false sense of security. Again, a nice looking channel. Possible we have the peak in, or again, if we do go higher, we'll be watching to see if we get a topping tail or something. But again, it is possible, as I've said, listen carefully, it's possible the highs from this last week hold. We start seeing a bunch of sell signals being triggered. And not just on the RSI, I showed you the awesome oscillator, and again, MACD, same thing. Again, these divergences are going to play out. We're going to get a big sell-off. So again, I wouldn't ignore these divergences. And also, not only do we have the negative divergence on the RSI and down here on the MACD, as you can see, but also we have it on the NAAIM exposure index, which is the exposure to equities by active money managers. And again, it formed a divergence at the March peak. It sold off, it came back up, and now it's forming a larger divergence. And we've got one in the most recent price action going as well with last week's high. And that might be it. And we overthrew the upper boundary, got a little topping tail, closed below it. So again, it could be that's all she wrote. Everything starts turning back to bearish. But this divergence, again, is showing active money managers all in. There's a divergence present with lower highs. So again, we're likely going to see a reversal here. We had a divergence back over here. Again, a negative divergence at this peak, a triple divergence at this peak. We had a divergence here at the March high. We're forming a multiple point divergence here. Again, getting a divergence in this most recent price action. So you've got this massive negative divergence here. This one led to a 27.5% sell-off. This one's likely going to usher in the bear market. Again, it's still possible that we form the divergence on the RSI in the daily time frame if signals turn bearish and then they turn right back to bullish. Turn bearish and remain bearish. Again, these divergences could lead to a major reversal if we start taking off the 10 and the 20-week moving average. But wanted to, again, show you this because it is suggesting that that a top is forming or has completed Because the MACDs haven't rolled over in the daily time frame on NASDAQ and S&P, again, there's still the possibility that we attempt a recovery before they do roll over. That's certainly possible. And again, surrounding our 10-period moving average here, we took it out on NASDAQ, S&P's testing it. Do attempt a recovery before we get those rollovers. Again, it is possible, or that we see the MACD roll over and then quickly turn back up. It is still possible we get these divergences or a confirmation of a lower high on these RSIs. The NASDAQ will sometimes diverge with the S&P. Now, it already has a small divergence. We already have one. NASDAQ peaked on Monday. The S&P, with our short trading week, peaked on Thursday of last week and higher. NASDAQ did not. Again, I've talked about the channels. I've also talked about this rising wedge right here. So again, we down with a 3-day losing streak. We had a bearish engulfing that is now confirmed. Again, we did not confirm it with our spinning top candlestick on Friday. It is now confirmed. So again, possibility that bearish engulfing that created the topping tail with our gravestone doji on the weekly time frame, it's very, very possible that has marked this as a peak from last week on Monday, five trading sessions ago. We don't have to form a divergence on these RSIs, but it's still possible that we do. And again, it's still possible that S&P tries to go higher, but NASDAQ makes a lower high. We'll be watching. Do we get a bigger sell-off? If we do, we'll be looking to see if the MACDs roll over. And if we get a bigger sell-off, RSI might try to firm up around the 50 level if it doesn't try to do it immediately surrounding the 10-period moving average. But again, whether we have a peak or not, it's again likely that we're forming these head and shoulder patterns that we're going to sell off going into the summer here, back to this 17,000 area here and the 4,900 area on the S&P 500. Stochastic broke 80 today on the NASDAQ, so we'll be watching to see does it remain there or does it turn back up. The pring parameters forming this massive negative divergence, just like what we're seeing in the weekly time frame. We'll be watching this gravestone doji to see if the high holds there, and if we do rebound, again, we still may get a lower high this week. Say we try to rebound and then sell out before the weekends and confirm it, or on into the next week confirm it. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But again, do we get a larger divergence with NASDAQ and S&P? Possibly. But again, watch to see, do we get this 3-week pattern before the week ends in the form of an evening doji star. Wide range bar, doji, wide range red bar reversal. Now, while we don't have a divergence on the RSI or MACD momentum, NASDAQ did complete a divergence on Friday and rolled over. So again, we'll see if that high holds from last Monday on the NASDAQ daily chart. Bearish things happening on NASDAQ as it goes back and test and take out the 10-period moving average in the daily time frame. The MACD has gone negative. We've lost the 50-period moving average. As I said over the weekend, again, it's still possible that we form diversions here. We don't have to. Again, we peaked on Monday. We got a lower high on Thursday, and then we've now seen this sell-off. That may be it. Moving towards oversold territory now. We've come into it. If the MACD remains negative and we remain below the 50-period moving average, that's extremely bearish. I talked about possible channels. Again, don't have to reach those levels. Like I said, gravestone doji, and we'll be watching to see if it gets confirmed by the end of the week. Weekly time frame. Again, momentum's becoming oversold here. And again, we've lost the 50. We dropped over here. We dropped below the momentum line. We dropped below the momentum cloud in the 60-minute time frame. Signals continue to be bearish. At the trending cloud, it's turning bearish into the future. We'll see if we get a bounce here. Also directly below is the support and resistance line for NASDAQ. Momentum in the 60-minute time frame has been bearish for the last 3 trading sessions. NASDAQ 100. And we've had this sell-off with NASDAQ. Momentum is still hanging in there at the moment. That could change tomorrow, but momentum's still hanging in there here with momentum and the trend still being bullish at this time for NASDAQ in the daily time frame. The bearish engulfing candlestick that we had Thursday, the topping tail on the weekly chart for last week. Bearish engulfing here on NASDAQ daily chart. Again, got a warning sign that possible reversal or a bigger pullback could take place with the sell signal there. But momentum has not shifted. That could happen. That could change tomorrow. Again, we're still seeing, at the moment anyways, momentum still positive. We could see that change. Even if we attempt to rebound, it could still change. Over here we got warning of a top, but it just produced a pullback. The NASDAQ, and again, momentum shifted back to bullish. We got the warning signs of a possible top. We need to see the cloud broken here and eventually drop below this line right here, which represents a trend. NASDAQ is going to change. I'll be watching to see if a divergence develops or not, or confirmation of a lower high. We attempt to rebound at some point. We have a 3-day losing streak now. The spinning top was a continuation of the selling pressure from the bearish engulfing. NASDAQ daily chart here. Warning signs of a top or a bigger pullback. Momentum is still positive at the moment. That could change before the weekends or even tomorrow.